Good afternoon and welcome again to our KGW Q&A. We are focused on ways to make your life easier through COVID-19, and for so many of you right now, education has a whole new meaning. With distance learning, at-home schooling, remote graduations, we know it's all very different. It can be stressful. My name is Galen Ettlin and I'm a reporter and anchor for KGW. Today we are taking your questions live in the comments and talking about tips for parents, how to modify teaching for different kids, and how to balance education and wellness. Our guests today are Barbara Steinberg, CEO of PDX Reading Specialist, and Colleen O'Mani, the Director of Learning Support at Jesuit High School. I want to thank both of you so much for being here today because I know it's a busy time for educators. And I'd like to start with a brief introduction of what you both do here. Barbara, can we start with you? What exactly is PDX Reading Specialist?
Thanks for having me. Well, PDX Reading Specialist is an organization that supports educators, families, and kids directly who learn differently. And by that, I mean students who generally are very, very smart and have great experiences in school, but for some reason really struggle with reading and writing and spelling. And we support everyone who works with those kids in school, in home, and in the broader community.
All right, Barbara, thank you very much. Colleen, turning to you, what's your background and role at Jesuit High School?
Well, my background is I've been a classroom teacher. I started out teaching kindergarten and I've taught all the way up through high school. And I then became a special educator. And my job at Jesuit is primarily I'm responsible for the 180 or so kids at Jesuit with some sort of learning difference or for whom English is not their first language, kind of like Barbara's population. But also, I just work with teachers there to make learning accessible for all, because what we know is the best strategies to teach kids who struggle are just kind of the best strategies to teach everyone.
Such good resources that we have in house today. Thank you both again for being here. Barbara, let's just start the conversation off here with what should the primary focus be during distance learning?
That's such a great question. When abruptly overnight, teachers and families had to really change their focus and become homeschool parents, we struggled to figure out what that really means. And I think the most important thing that everyone needs to understand, both educators and parents, is that we are doing distance learning, which is significantly different from homeschooling. We're doing distance learning as a response to a crisis. And that means our focus needs to be first and foremost on making sure that the social emotional needs of our kids are taken care of. And also to make sure that we broaden the lens that we think about learning through. Learning in the classroom is generally very structured. It's driven by curriculum, it's driven by state standards. But when we're learning at home, especially in light of the circumstances, we need to broaden our lens of what learning really means. Learning happens outside the walls of the classroom. Learning happens beyond a computer, beyond worksheets, and to really just think and encourage parents to engage in meaningful activities that involve language, whether that language is spoken, written, and to just have engagement be the overarching goal.
Colleen, I want to give you a chance to also respond to that same question about what you think the primary focus should be. But I also want to kind of get into some of the nitty gritty here of what people are going through right now, talking about, say, different ages of kids. This is going to be playing out very differently for everyone. You have four kids in different age groups, you mentioned to me yesterday. What's the right approach for parents right now in facilitating productive distance learning with different factors like that? Colleen, are you able to hear me? It looks like maybe we're having a technical difficulty here getting through to Colleen. It sounds like something maybe is not working. From your perspective, though, Barbara, would we be able to kind of speak to that a little bit? I know you work with kids in all sorts of different demographics and backgrounds. What does that look like when you play out with that conversation?
Well, and I mean, obviously, the the biggest obstacle primarily for implementing distance learning is access. Access to
I can
technology,
hear. Yeah.
access to internet. And so if we have kids who don't have
I heard him asking
accessibility,
the same question twice.
Oh,
then
it looks like we're having some audio
My
issues. I so
sound is
apologize,
delayed.
Barbara and Colleen. All right, so I think we're going to try to sort out Colleen's delay. She's hearing us on a very long delay here. Barbara, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead and continue your thought. We might have some intermittent talking over each other, but that's all right. It's to be expected in
yeah,
these days of
no,
internet.
yeah, exactly. Or it's all a pivot and adapt, right?
There you go.
In any case, the good news is that there are resources available for every single age band that is out there. And both Colleen and I are going to share resources that will be available through the written form of this Q&A. But once again, to kind of circle back to the fact that things like cooking and constructing and gardening and talking about what's happening can all be opportunities for meaningful, engaging learning that doesn't necessarily come directly from a child's teacher, but will certainly help with building the foundation that's required for being able to go back to school and have a successful reentry whenever schools open again.
What's the best approach right now, would you say, Barbara, in sort of facilitating that productive distance learning? Because I know we've talked about that a little bit, but in, say, trying to get someone prepared for the next grade or trying to get someone prepared for the next stage of life, there's so many gaps to jump over right now with so many people at home trying to navigate these challenges. Are there specific approaches that you would say parents can be taking right now to say make sure that kids are on track for whatever that next stage may be?
Yeah, one of the best things that happened as a result of this whole pandemic is that educational organizations started to offer their resources free and wide. And there was a huge database, which would have taken days to go through. And so, what I did was kind of pull out if you were going to choose one resource to help your child keep up with math and one resource to help them keep up with language, what would they be? And the math resource that has been available from for years and years and years is called Khan Academy. And Khan Academy was developed to be able to bring math education to anybody, anywhere, as long as you have, of course, internet access and a technology device. But if you do, parents can get a free subscription. They can have their kids take a placement test to see where they're at. The lessons are video and live and doesn't require instruction from a parent. And that way, if kids can every day do a little bit of Khan Academy, we can hope that will mitigate any learning loss and hopefully fill in holes that exist so that when kids go back to school in the area of math, the holes are less than they would be if we did nothing at all. In the area of language and reading, um, there are multiple resources, but one of the other great organizations that made access is called ReadWorks. And ReadWorks has articles and stories. You can listen to them on audio, you can read them with your eyes. There are comprehension questions. And once again, a parent or a caregiver can easily go on, access one of those, print it out, or use it online. And one or two of those a day will help keep up those reading comprehension and those decoding skills that we know kids need to be successful readers. So, at the very least, those two are great starting points for parents looking for resources.
And before we try to bring Colleen back in, we are going to test her audio here in a second. Barbara, I do want to touch back to something that you mentioned earlier about the social emotional well being of both kids and parents right now going through this. What is your approach? What are you telling people that they should be doing to help with that balance?
Well, the challenge, of course, is that as soon as parents felt like they became their child's teacher, it put a tremendous amount of stress. Educators are highly trained individuals who wear multiple hats. And every day they wear those hats flexibly and they do it with relative ease and expertise. But to place all those hats on a parent makes parents feel overwhelmed and inadequate and stressed. And when that stress trickles down to the children, then we end up having some relational challenges. And no learning happens when there are relational challenges, when anxiety is high. The number one goal for kids and families has to be emotional well being. And again, Colleen and I have both shared resources to help, books that address how to talk to kids about COVID-19, social, emotional, and mindfulness activities. That should be the number one goal before any learning takes place.
All right, I know we are working on updating this. It looks like we've got Colleen back here. Can you hear me all right, Colleen? Oh, it looks like there's still a long delay here. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Colleen. We're going to keep working on it here. In the meantime, Barbara, let's try this. How do you give kids a voice in all of this?
Okay. So, two of my keywords are voice and choice. And of course, it's an art form, and parenting is an art form. When we give kids a voice and power, it's perceived power. What we're really doing is saying, would you rather do your math first or your reading first? Would you rather go play outside or jump rope inside? And by giving them that choice, we're giving them a lot of voice. And kids need to feel empowered. They need to feel empowered to be able to feel like their world, which was turned upside down literally overnight, they have some semblance of control over. But again, having it be a bit of an art form where the adults in their lives are really directing those choices. I also think that when we use this as an opportunity to say, outside the structure of mainstream education, we have tremendous opportunity for kids to learn about topics of interest to them. Again, most curriculum is very prescribed. And so our kids learn what we say they're going to learn because the curriculum dictates that. And here we have an opportunity for kids to be able to say, I'm really passionate about fill in the blank. And using that opportunity to make learning be broader than how we think about it in traditional classroom is an approach that's going to pay off in the long run for everybody. It's going to reduce stress for parents and caregivers. It's going to increase engagement for kids. And again, the goal is engaged learning.
I love that idea of raising a choice for a kid to have some input in because that makes it feel more like it's a mutual learning experience. I do want to try to bring in now Jared Cowley, our senior digital producer for KGW. Our educators here have sent us a lot of great resources. We've mentioned a few of them during this chat. Jared, what do those look like on our platforms?
Well, first, thanks, Galen, for having me on. I, this is such a helpful resource. I'm actually a parent of 5 children, and so it is crazy juggling, working full time and having your kids going through distance learning. So this is a wonderful resource, and I'm really grateful to be on the show. The best place you can find resources that KGW has compiled to help parents and children with distance learning is right on our website. If you go to kgw.com, you'll find our KGW Digital Q&A web article, and that article is packed full of helpful resources that we've compiled, as well as links to resources that our two experts on today's show have shared with us. You can find this information directly on kgw.com. You're looking at the website right here. You'll see that the article is in the top spot on our website right now. But let's say you're looking for these resources. Let's say you're rewatching this live stream 2 or 3 days from now, and you're looking for these resources later, and the article isn't in the top spot. Just do a search for KGW Digital Q&A, and you'll find the article with all the resources in it. You can find all of this information on KGW's app as well. Thanks a lot, Galen.
All right, Jared, thank you so much. For all of you joining us right now, I'm Galen Ettlin, and this is our KGW Digital Q&A about successful distance learning during COVID-19. Our guests are Barbara Steinberg, CEO of PDX Reading Specialist, and we're also working on getting Colleen O'Mani, the Director of Learning Support at Jesuit High School. Right now, we're having a slight technical difficulty where she can hear this live stream except for my questions, so that makes it really difficult for her, so we appreciate her bearing with us through that. Barbara, getting back to you here, you mentioned how this is not the same thing as homeschooling. Can you talk a little bit more about why you feel that way?
Well, homeschooling as a movement have very different goals from traditional education. And those are obviously gross generalizations, but that is generally the truth. And so when we start to think about what we're doing as homeschooling, we become a little bit misaligned in terms of what our goals are. Certainly, if there had been time for schools and districts to prepare for what we have now come to accept as distance learning, we could have been a lot more thoughtful about what the outcomes are. But that just isn't the case. And when when we shift our mindset around what we're really dealing with, we're really dealing with a response to a crisis. And educators are working overtime to figure out how to deliver the instruction that they would have delivered in person in this format. The biggest obstacles, of course, are, well, there are so many obstacles, but the biggest are equity and accessibility. And as I mentioned, the accessibility issues are, since technology platforms are the primary way that educators are communicating with students and their families, many of our students don't have internet access. They also don't have access to a device. So those limiting factors prohibit distance learning from taking place in the way that schools and districts envisioned it might. Um, that kind of shift of mindset is more to help families take off of their plate the burden that they're feeling. It is definitely true that many schools, especially private schools, that have to be able to put this hybrid model in the first, have been very successful at continuing the teaching and learning that was happening prior to this whole shutdown of schools. But the ones that weren't, we need to realize that we can't just pick up and expect the same outcome as if our kids were learning in the classroom, but this time at home.
What's one of the number one questions that you'd say that families have been sending to you through this challenge?
Well, the number one frustration has been, I find it so difficult to work with my own child. And I too am a parent of children and career educator. And I have always said before this crisis, and even more so now, I find it excruciatingly challenging to be able to work with my own children. I either get the response that I'm doing it the wrong way. The bottom line is that the relationship comes into play. Kids and educators, their teachers, have really special relationships. And, there's a reason that educators are able to teach children, and many of them, so effectively. But there's an exponential difficulty when a parent steps into that role. And so I really, Colleen mentioned the other day when we had a check-in, I spend a lot of time just talking parents down and helping them realize that they are not inadequate, they're not failures, and kind of reframing what the overarching goal should be. Because if we try to reach for something that feels so out of reach, we all end up feeling stressed and frustrated, and nothing gets accomplished.
All right, I want to bring back in Colleen O'Mani from Jesuit High School. I think we've sorted out the audio issue, and if you can't hear me, Colleen,
Right.
that's all right. I'm going to have Barbara ask you the question, so we're going to play a little game of
No,
telephone.
I
If it
can
doesn't
hear
work,
you.
it's all good. Excellent.
Great.
Oh, yes, success.
I'm
Everyone working
back.
behind the scenes, we
Yes.
so appreciate it. So,
Poor
Colleen, we were
Barbara.
just
That was
talking
some
about
heavy lifting. Yeah.
we were just talking about sort of that balancing act that all of these parents and teachers and students are all playing right now. And, you're a mom too and an educator. We're talking about the challenges of educating your own kid. How are you juggling all of this? And maybe how can someone watching this now use some of those life lessons to their benefit?
Well, I think it requires a great deal of grace to and for everyone involved. It is not easy. And I have four children. The youngest is in second grade. The oldest is graduating high school this year. And it's a challenge. They need different things, and they're in very different places because they're different individuals. I mean, I think one of the issues is, you look around to your friends, your own family. Everyone is really processing this really differently, and so what works for one might not really work for another. I think some strategies that tend to work well, especially if you have, as Jared mentioned, and I have a lot of different ages of folks in one place, is trying to keep some kind of a common schedule, trying to wake up at a time that feels kind of reasonable. It doesn't need to be 6:15, but maybe 8:30. can be a time you can agree upon that everyone can kind of get moving together. Some kind of check-in in the morning, maybe some kind of midday check-in if that's, and then, or maybe it's like having some kind of a dinner together, having some sort of common touchstones, but then also giving kids some space. You know, teenagers are not designed developmentally to be in houses with their parents and siblings all day long. It's kind of fighting nature. That's not what they're designed to do. And so giving them some space to be in bedrooms behind closed doors, taking care of what they need to take care of, is appropriate and reasonable. It's also appropriate and reasonable to say, sometimes we're going to do things together. And I think when it comes to learning, I agree absolutely with what Barbara said. I'm the last person some of my children want to see help with teaching. So maybe a sibling is a better choice. Maybe for a project, they would rather see a sibling's face. And earlier you talked about choice. I mean, that can be kind of a matter of choice. Someone's going to have to work with you on this. Who would you like it to be? That could be a way of sort of incorporating some options in.
So we've been talking about distance learning and how it's even a challenge for expert educators like yourself. For someone who's a parent who's new to this, trying to facilitate this, obviously they're not trying to be the teacher necessarily, but they're trying to make sure their kids are on track and successful. How can they help their kids and the rest of the family really stay organized during something like this? Barbara, I'll go to you first, and then we can go to you, Colleen.
Well, I think the key word that Colleen said is first and foremost, and that's schedule. Schools provide structure, and that structure is very regimented. And I agree, there's a beautiful opportunity for a little bit of flexibility. But there has to be structure because structure and schedules make you feel safe. Kids respond well when they know what to expect. Parents who have not had a lens into a classroom, especially an elementary classroom, they will see a schedule of what's going to happen throughout the day. And kids who know what's going to come next can let their anxieties calm down. And what we as educators know about anxiety, which is running higher than normal right now, is that when anxiety is peaked, then academic performance declines. So, first and foremost, it's creating that schedule, that structure of the day with flexibility built into it. That's number one.
Colleen, do you have any follow up to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. My family would laugh at this question because, and my students, because I'm kind of the queen of templates. But I do think having, a template that takes trying to work from digital resources, I think is difficult. I think there's a place for paper. I think there's a place for a big whiteboard that just takes all the work for the week and sort of puts it in one place. I also think, for things like Zoom calls, kind of having a master schedule where you take, again, all these little parts. One's on, Google Classroom, one's on Canvas, one's on this, one's on that, and just taking all of that disparate information and trying to get it onto one piece of paper. I think it makes it feel more manageable for kids, but I also think it makes it feel more manageable for parents to be able to see, okay, what do I need to do and when do I need to do it? There's just too many codes and and different schedules for different people and different resources. I think trying to get that all into one place can be really, really helpful.
Colleen, earlier, Barbara mentioned some resources for parents who are concerned about their kids possibly falling behind right now through all of this. What would you say for people who are concerned about kids falling behind? What is your advice?
Well, I would say, first of all, remembering that we're all going through this together. This is something that is happening to everyone. So taking that deep breath of, it's not just my child. This is something that is impacting a generation of kids. And if you're someone who's worried about what will colleges think, or will my child be ready for that next step of middle school or high school, just know that this is being built into the experience that they will have. So that's kind of the initial deep breath, is that we're all going through this. And then I would say, if you have concerns about falling behind, just remembering that, learning is happening all the time. learning doesn't
Mhm.
just happen in the classroom. There's all kinds of different ways that learning is taking place. And while this is, I think keeping up on kind of the basics, reading and math, I sort of could hear Barbara talking about that, and I agree. If there are ways to, utilize audio books for a reluctant reader to just keep engaging with story and some basic comprehension on like getting intrigued by, well, why did the character do this, or maybe try a new series. I mean, all of that I think is going to have great benefit, but also that there's lots of different kinds of learning. There's learning to, kind of pick up new passions and kind of delve into things you're naturally interested in. There's learning chores around the house. There's learning how to be part of a community in a different way that is a family. Or there's learning how to find opportunities for service around you that don't need to be big, elaborate service, but just helping a neighbor. Or, there's a lot of different ways that our kids have opportunities to grow in ways that are maybe new for them.
Mhm.
Such a unique opportunity right now, especially during COVID-19. I think for a lot of us, sort of recognizing the community around us in a new way than we've seen it before. For everyone who's just joining us, though, I want to remind everyone I'm Galen Ettlin. This is our KGW Q&A about successful distance learning during COVID-19, and our guests are Barbara Steinberg, CEO of PDX Reading Specialist. You just heard from Colleen O'Mani, the Director of Learning Support at Jesuit High School. Barbara, turning to you here, for anyone who's feeling overwhelmed through this, it's kind of easy to feel that way right now. What is your
Yeah.
advice?
Well, I mean, what's been said over and over is to grant yourself permission to accept that we're going to make progress and perfection cannot be the goal. We're not in a position to replicate what was happening prior to the beginning of March. And I think once we grant ourselves permission, then we can start to focus on setting little goals. When Colleen said, the exposure to books, whether those are reading with our eyes or listening with audio, and being able to just talk about the characters, the lessons, all of that, that is the foundation of all learning. Our most powerful tool as educators and as human beings is language. And when you asked earlier, what's the question that I get a lot of? And other than the I'm feeling stressed out question, it's how long should I make my kid read for? Because a lot of parents have been conditioned to believe like the only academic event that happens is sitting down with a book and reading. But language is all around us. And so if a kid goes out and builds a, fort in the backyard, that's a wonderful opportunity to engage with them in conversation about how they built it. What are the tools they used? What vocabulary can I teach them? And the same is true with books. Books are words on paper. How we access those can be with our ears, with our eyes. All of it is a means to an end. And now, in this day and age, access to audiobooks widely available for free, assuming you have access to the tools, the internet. And so that needs to be the most important takeaway is it doesn't have to be what we've been conditioned to believe that it is sitting down with a book for a set amount of time, or it is sitting down and writing a story, a paragraph, an essay. We can express ourselves in multiple ways.
We got a great comment from a viewer, Maureen Milton, reminding us that there's also great resources for students available and accessible for free. Thank you to the taxpayers through the public library. So that's another resource for those books and audiobooks. I grew up listening to audiobooks myself, so I know that's such a valuable thing. Another piece to this conversation I think is really important. Since moving home to Portland recently, I got several messages from my former teachers who saw me on KGW, and it really reminded me of what an impact a great teacher has on your life forever. Because I mean, that was years and years and years ago. What would you say, Colleen, is the best approach to communicate with teachers right now? Because you're in a challenging situation too.
Yeah, great question. I would
Mm.
say it's Teacher Appreciation Week, and all of my teacher friends, those that amazing people I work with, and teachers from all different times in my life, and my own children's wonderful teachers, they are working so hard. I mean, they are not making a lot of banana bread during these days. They are barely showering. I mean, these poor people are just killing themselves. And so I think the first step again is to remember that, like, this is really hard. No one feels masterful with something that they've been doing for 7 weeks. And I think teachers are people who like to feel masterful. No one likes to feel, students or parents or kids, no one likes to feel like they're trying really hard and they're failing. So I think just that's step one, is remembering this is really difficult. And I would say then, um, right, I think it's great to keep in touch. Teachers don't know what's going on. One of the things that's really hard is that we used to spend a lot of time with children. And now we get glimpses, but it's really hard to know how they're doing. So we may not know, hey, um, this kiddo is watching siblings for a significant amount of the day, so family can work, because that's what they need. Or we may not know someone in the house is very ill, or we may not know, like, they're just having a really difficult time with this and experiencing some symptoms of anxiety and depression. Those are not things that can be apparent. And so I think um, explicitly saying those things over email, like, hey, I just want to let you know this is what's going on. Don't be afraid to reach out and sort of illuminate the circumstances around your student. And then I would say always what I say, which is to always use phrases like I statements, phrases that are like, here's what I see from my side, or here's what my student is telling me. Can you help fill in the other side of this, or tell me what it is I'm not seeing? Because I think all of us as parents have had those moments where we get really steamed or upset about something, and then come to find out maybe there's a little bit more to the story. So I think anytime I write an email to a teacher, one of my kids' teachers, I always try to remember, like, let's begin this with the premise of, here's what I know. Can you help me kind of fill in the rest of this story and go from there?
Barbara, you mentioned earlier that there are learning opportunities all around us when it comes to, building the fort outside. There's a learning opportunity to build vocabulary through different activities that maybe people haven't thought of before. So many things in our lives these days, though, are around a screen. We are on Zoom, we are chatting digitally, everyone's on their phone, emailing constantly. How can we balance screen time? What's good and what's bad here?
This has been the conversation circulating on so many educator blogs because, distance learning is not equal to digital learning. Distance learning and digital learning are two very separate things. And families come with lots of feelings around media and what's good, what's bad, and some altogether are just completely averse to it. The reality is, this is the platform by which most communication is happening. And so, any kind of interaction that is happening, whether it's a teacher sending a video, whether it's just the links to the websites that they want kids to complete activities on, all of that happens to be the primary platform by which distance learning is happening. However, that doesn't mean that we want kids of any age sitting in front of a screen all day. That's toxic. And so we have to be able to know how to put limits on that, and also to be able to recognize what's educational versus screen time that before this all happened was for pleasure, gaming, YouTube, so on and so forth. Um, Getting outside, and we've been blessed. The Oregon weather has been on our side since this whole thing happened. Getting outside needs to be a part of every family's routine. It's part of our mental health, and it's also, can be a learning environment as well. So there is no definitive amount of time at any age or grade, but it is a very, very important balancing act to recognize that we need our technology tools, but we don't want to spend all day in front of a screen.
Colleen, I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that. What do you feel?
Yeah, I of course agree with all of that. Thinking about teenagers, I think it's tricky because their primary social interactions right now might also be occurring on a screen. So I have found myself sort of instinctively, like, being like, put the phone down. And then I think, like, wait, that's the only access you have to your friends right now. Like, that is really the primary way you're seeing them. So maybe encouraging, like FaceTimes and phone calls in addition to just like snaps and texts might be great, because then you're interacting in a more normal social way, I would say, but you're still utilizing technology.
I think that's a great idea. Turning back to you, Barbara, and Colleen, you can also talk to this a little bit too. What do you do if a kid just simply is not interested in any of these approaches or in distance learning right now?
Yeah. I mean, that's where the relational piece happens. When Colleen was talking earlier about, this partnership between home and school, we as educators and hopefully as school communities have always valued partnerships between home and school, but it is incredibly imperative right now. And having educators being able to reach out to families and vice versa, to be able to not only get a little bit of a lens into what's happening inside the home so that educators can be aware of that because they're not hearing or seeing that from kids directly, is invaluable. But the reverse is also true. It is Teacher Appreciation Week, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation during this week so we can acknowledge how hard our educators are working. And if there's one more thing that an educator could do that has nothing to do with math or reading or writing or science or social studies, it's to make some sort of effort to let kids know explicitly that you matter to me. And we as educators inherently and intuitively show our kids and tell our kids that they matter to us when they're with us all day. But during this time, when they can't see or hear or feel that, how can we do that? Via a handwritten note, a text, an email, a video message, something that's personalized, because this kind of live interaction isn't happening. And the families I hear from are missing that from their teachers. So that would be kind of one additional idea to inspire that hope, to inspire that sense of connection, and build on that parent, caregiver slash school connection and relationship.
Colleen, turning to you, say if a kid is not interested, I don't know if you've got a follow up to that as well, but also looking ahead to the question, once we get to summer, do we keep trying to push the education or what's the approach?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, there are kids for whom this model is just not working very well. I think particularly about kids with executive function issues who were maybe barely hanging on um, in the very structured world of school, and then we pull all that out, and they are really struggling. And I think number one, acknowledging that, like, it's okay. This is really hard. What we're trying to do right now is difficult. And you've had, 12 years, 14 years, 8 years of practicing school. You've only had 7 weeks of practicing this. This will get easier and you will learn how to do it, but it's going to take some time. And then I would also say, I would be remiss if I didn't remind folks about my wonderful colleagues in the counseling department or counselors in schools. School counselors are also phenomenal. So if you have that relationship or that ability to reach out to someone who's not a teacher, but might be able to help you with strategies around motivation and care and make sure there aren't bigger issues going on, that might also be a resource.
I also want to point out, talking about the appreciation for teachers here, we got a comment appreciating you, Colleen, from Lauren Bloomhart saying freshman in Magis seminar loves Mrs. O'Mani. So that's really fun to see during our live stream
Aw.
here. In practice, people are sending the positivity. We appreciate that. Colleen, coming back to you, you talked about how you are really into part of your background is special education. For those parents who have students that are in special education or have other sort of learning differences, what can we all be doing to help lift those families up?
Yeah. I mean, this is really, I think, these are the hardest questions because we know that kind of one size fits all approach doesn't always work for learners who learn differently. And a lot of this, especially as it was kind of developed quickly, as Barbara pointed out, takes a little bit of more of a blunt instrument approach. And I hope as we move along, we're kind of getting better at specializing. Um, I would say, again, really thinking about leading with compassion. It's very easy to get frustrated, even when you know um, that you're working with a learner who learns differently. I think as a parent, it's still easy to get frustrated and be like, oh my gosh, you did all that work and you didn't turn it in. Like, how is that even possible? But I do think, I mean, it is not surprising if you take one step back that that would be difficult. Like, we already know that. So I think, again, just trying to maybe take breaks. I think it's great modeling for parents to take breaks themselves and just be like, wow, this is hard, this is frustrating, this is difficult for both of us. I can see you're working hard, I'm working hard. Maybe we just need to take a breather and we'll come back to this when we both feel more ready. That is always a good idea. But then also just remembering to lead with sort of that compassion when you can summon your best self to say, wow, I know how hard this is for you, and I know you're trying your best. Let's try to figure out what's working and kind of iterate on that. And then to communicate with teachers again, hey, after 3 hours of attempting this and crying and doors slam, like, we're not gonna we're gonna call it. Let's come back tomorrow and re-strategize about how we can make this work, because at a certain point it's just not worth it. Like, there are no gains that are going to be made at that point, and it's better to call it and just kind of revisit when you can bring a fresh strategy.
Just as a
Can
quick
I
refresher
can I
for
piggyback
everyone
on what
joining us
Colleen
here.
said?
Absolutely. I just want to introduce you one more time, just so people know who we're talking to if they're just joining us here. You just heard from Colleen Omani, for the Director of Learning and Support at Jesuit High School. And on your screen right now is Barbara Steinberg, CEO of PDX Reading Specialist. Barbara, go ahead and continue your thought.
Well, one of the strategies that Colleen mentioned, modeling, is a strategy that teachers use all day, every day with various subject matter. And in the context of this situation, I think modeling can be a tremendous, tremendous strategy for parents to engage when it comes to sharing with their kids that they too are experiencing stress, anxiety, fear. Now, we as parents, we want to, put on a brave face, and we don't want our kids to take on our own fears and anxieties. But there's a tremendous potential for having our kids who may not know how to voice how they're feeling or why they're frustrated to be able to hear it through us. And that might sound like, you know, I am feeling so frustrated because I am trying to get this assignment done, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do, or this work project, or I have so much on my plate. And by sharing how I'm feeling and then being able to open the gateway to, are you feeling, any frustration about your assignment? I think it can give kids a voice again, but it can also build that bridge of communication, which comes down to the fact that we're all in this together, right? We're trying to build this spirit of collaboration, both between home and school, but also collaboration between parent, caregiver, and child or children.
I want to mention here too that Lauren Blumhardt followed up on her comment and says, "Thank you, Barbara and Colleen, for all you do." I think we're echoing that right now. One, because you're here for this live stream, we appreciate that. But then also, two, to all of the educators out there who are working extra hard through all of these challenges to help everybody out and keep on track. So thank you again. I do want to kind of circle back around here to the main discussion here of distance learning, and we really want to be productive and proactive here. So for both of you, what would you say are your, say, top three do's of social distancing? What's the things that people should be maybe going down their checklist? I know we're not aiming for perfection, as Barbara said, but we're aiming for some path to success and some regimented schedules, right? So, Colleen, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Well, I have to come back to that idea of getting information down sort of on paper. I just see so many kids trying to work just from digital resources, and families. And I think there's a place in this world for good old fashioned making a poster or using a whiteboard or just getting things in one place. I think that is a huge difference for me. I don't think I could operate just from like 18 websites. I don't think that would work for me. Number two, I would say, again, think about learning in a bigger way. Think about, what kids are learning. when you have a moment of despair of sort of like, oh my gosh, I don't think we're making any progress, just try to focus on the things that you are learning. I think coming back to that idea of things like chores, there's been plenty said of this generation that they don't know how to do sort of adulting or sort of daily things like, learn how to make a meal, learn how to do laundry, learn how to, what goes into kind of running the family. I think those are all like really valuable things that maybe we're going to feel better knowing that our kids have these skills as they try to become independent. I think.
I think that's such good advice. Barbara, do you have a follow up or anything else that you'd like to add to that list?
Sure. So I would say my top three to dos of successful distance learning would be create a schedule and stick to it so that each day doesn't feel like this endless blob of time. To really try to engage in open-ended conversations and questions with kids. Oftentimes we ask questions that result in a one-word answer, and to perhaps use conversation starters like, I think, I feel, I wonder. And again, because language is the foundation of learning and it's our most powerful tool, that engaging in discussion is going to be learning in the best way possible. And then the third one is giving kids voice and choice in a very controlled way. And as you mentioned, the kiddo who's reluctant, that's one of my kids. And it's been a constant battle. And I've had to kind of say, you know what, we're not going to battle over the assignment that's being given out from school. But would you like to either watch a TED Ed and talk about that or read an article about a topic of interest to you? So I'm not going to battle you over the thing that's being assigned because there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what the learning is, but you're going to be engaged in something. So what is it going to be? And I turned this very, very, stubborn kid into one that realizes he now has control. The outcome is engagement in something that is educational and learning.
Excellent. I think
And
that's
stay
all
positive.
great advice. I want to bring back in Jared Cowley, our senior digital producer for KGW here. We've been talking all about these great resources. After this chat is over, where can people find those?
Thanks, Galen. First, I just want to say how wonderful a resource this has been for me as a parent. I've learned a lot during this time from Barbara and Colleen. They've both been incredible guests. I appreciate the advice, but also the messages of compassion. This is really hard for teachers. It's hard for parents. It's hard for students. But I'm grateful for all the teachers and educators who are out there working so hard to make this work for all of us. My dad was a teacher. Two of my brothers are teachers. And I just have to say, teachers are amazing, incredible people. And I'm really grateful for all they've done. And I'm grateful to Barbara and Colleen for coming on today and giving us such good advice. Back to the question about where you can find resources. The best place to find all the resources KGW has compiled to help parents and children with distance learning is on our website. If you go to kgw.com, you'll find our KGW Digital Q&A web article. You see it right there, which is packed full of helpful resources that we've compiled. It also has links to resources that our experts on today's show have shared with us. You can find this information and all of our coverage of distance learning and our local schools directly on kgw.com. You'll see that today's digital Q&A article, it's on the top spot on our website right now. But let's say you're looking for these resources a couple days from now. Maybe you're rewatching this live stream a few days from now. You don't see that article in the top spot. You can do a search for KGW Digital Q&A and you'll find the article with all the resources. You can also find all of this information on KGW's app as well. You can also visit KGW's YouTube channel. We have a lot of helpful video resources there, including our KGW Q&A playlist that has every one of our Q&A episodes in which we answer your questions about various coronavirus-related topics, including about distance learning and education. And finally, I want to mention the most recent episode of Inside Woodlawn, KGW's wonderful series that we've been running all year. KGW's Kristen Severance checked in with teachers, parents, and students at Woodlawn Elementary about their experiences with distance learning. And it's a really great resource to be able to learn from others who are experiencing many of the same challenges in this new reality we all find ourselves in. You can find that story and those videos on kgw.com and on KGW's YouTube channel. Thanks a lot, Galen.
Jared, thank you. And he's doing all of this from home with 5 kids too. We just have to all be amazed, right, at what everyone's doing. Jared, thank you so much. Before we wrap up here, I just want to wrap back around to talking about the successes of distance learning and any final message that you have for parents, families, kids out there right now going through this. I don't know who wants to start. I think I'm just going to go for Colleen first because why not? Tell us what you think.
Yeah, again, I would just say this is difficult for everyone. It's really difficult for teachers, as I mentioned. It's really difficult for families. I mean, I know when you're trying to you know, be on Zoom calls and prepare meals and keep other people going. The idea of trying some of these strategies seems crazy, and that's okay. That might not be the moment for that. Like, you don't need to do that in these moments. Like, find the moments that work, and they may be far and few between. And it's really difficult for children. I mean, I think they're trying really hard, but this is not easy. And as I said earlier, they've only really had 7 weeks of practice at this, and it's brand new. So I started my career as a kindergarten teacher, and I remember those first couple months of kindergarten are a lot for kids. Some of them regress, some of them act out. They just sort of act in crazy ways. And I remember always thinking it wasn't until Halloween that everyone kind of settled out. I think this is kind of the same thing. This is this major transition, and you're just seeing kids dealing with it in really different ways because it's like this huge life shift. And so it's not forever. This is not going to be our lives going forward. But I just think remembering how hard this is, whether or not they're directly telling you, you might be seeing some crazy things. And I just think back to that kindergarten transition. Like, this is gonna take some time.
Colleen, thank you. Barbara, what is your final thoughts here?
My final thought is that at the end of the day, if we can inspire hope in our kids, and one way to do that is by having the dangling carrot of, when we go back to school, dot dot dot. Now, we don't know when that's going to be, but when we go back to school, what are we looking forward to? And not having an end date of, when all of these restrictions are going to be lifted and when we get to go back to school is creating anxiety for all of us. But knowing that it will happen eventually and being able to talk about it really gives us a sense of hope. And at the same time, while dealing with all of the struggles, being recognizing the successes, recognizing the fact that families who might have been going in 40,000 different ways, shuttling kids to 40 different activities a week, now have some really quality time. I say that as a person who is going 40 million miles a minute. This has been a forced time out, and there are tremendous positives that come from that. And highlighting those and talking about them can help be the counterbalance to all of the negative and struggles and stress that we're facing. And it's important because what we talk about becomes our internal messaging.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. I want to thank our guests today, Barbara Steinberg of PDX Reading Specialist and Colleen O'Mani of Jesuit High School, and all of the KGW staff behind the scenes making this happen today. And thank you all for watching this digital KGW Q&A. We're going to be back next Thursday to answer more of your questions. And please be sure to tune in to KGW at 7 tonight for our new show, The Good Stuff, highlighting all the positive, uplifting news in your communities. I'm Galen Ettlin. Be well, and we'll see you soon.